What is up, everyone? I am James Lynch, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, we're going back to UFC 281. We're going to look at that lightweight fight between Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier. But before I give you my preview and pick, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. It really does help out this channel big time. Okay, excited to talk about this one. Really exciting fight. Only disappointing part, I just mentioned it there. It's a lightweight fight on the main card. It's only 3 rounds. I really think a fight like this should be 5 rounds, but hey, I'm not the matchmaker. I'm just a guy behind a camera here, but you can see there, Poirier, Chandler, awesome matchup. And we're going to start first with the former UFC interim lightweight champion, Dustin Poirier, the Diamond. Let's get into it here. Let's talk about Poirier. You can see there 28-7 record with 1 no contest. He's got 14 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 7 decisions in his career. This is Poirier's first 3-round fight since May of 2017. I forgot about that. If you go look in his record, all 5-round fights. So that'll be really interesting here. And of course, that was the first Eddie Alvarez fight he had at UFC 211. So a long time that Poirier has not fought 3 rounds. It's always been 5 rounds. Poirier, you can see there, 33 years old. He's 5'9" with a 73-inch reach. He's 3 years younger. He also has a 1-inch height and 1.5-inch reach advantage over Michael Chandler. I mentioned it there. He's the former interim lightweight champion. He's a BJJ black belt under Tim Crater. He trains an American Top Team, and he's the number 2 ranked UFC lightweight. He's got fight of the night 7 times against the Korean Zombie, Akira Khorasani, Jim Miller, Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, and Dan Hooker. He's got submission of the night 1 time against Max Holloway. He's got performance of the night 4 times against Carlos Diego Ferreira, Yancy Medeiros, Eddie Alvarez, and Conor McGregor. And he's got the most knockout victories in the UFC lightweight division history at 8 knockouts. Very impressive. You can see here, Poirier made his amateur debut way back in December of 2007, made his professional MMA debut back in May of 2009, made his UFC debut in January of 2011. If you look at it there, against Josh Grisby. Had a couple fights in WEC, of course. That's where he got some notoriety. And I think people forget, I just wanted to mention this as a Canadian. He fought in Canada back in 2010 at Ringside MMA 7. I think that was the card headlined by, was it Steve Bosse? No, it wasn't. That was a different card. But Alex Garcia, former UFC fighter, was on that card. Just a little tidbit for you Canadian viewers out there, in case you were wondering, that Poirier did fight there. In terms of Poirier's UFC record, he's got a 20-6 UFC record. He's got 13 stoppage victories. Poirier, one thing I think people forget is that Poirier has fought in multiple weight classes. So he's fought 24 times at lightweight, which is his mainstay weight class. He's fought 10 times at featherweight in his career, and that's just in the UFC, not in the WEC. And he had 2 catchweight fights. Now, the catchweight fights were because his opponents had missed weight, so it wasn't anything on his end. Poirier has always made weight. There's no issues there. Now, in terms of some notable wins, Dustin Poirier has a lot of them. I wanted to include the Josh Grisby win at the time. Now, Grisby, most people watching this are like, who's Josh Grisby? Unless you're an older MMA fan. But Grisby, if you look at the time, was 14-1. There was a lot of promise for him. Grisby, basically, his career went completely down the toilet for a variety of reasons. His skill set declined. And most importantly, Josh Grisby turned out to be a pretty bad guy. Go Google Josh Grisby. I think he was on Dr. Phil, if I'm not mistaken. Just had some terrible, terrible domestic violence issues and some other stuff. But I wanted to include that on there just because Grisby, again, had a 14-1 record at the time, more fights and a better record than Poirier at the time. Max Holloway, this is a very good win back in the day because Dustin Poirier still to this day is the only fighter to finish Max Holloway. That includes Conor McGregor and other fighters that Holloway has fought. So the fact that Poirier finished him, very impressive. Now, for some context, though, you got to look at the record here. Holloway was only 4-0 at the time. Poirier was 11-1, so a bit of a mismatch there in terms of the amount of experience. He's actually has 2 wins over Holloway. Of course, he defeated Holloway again in their interim title fight. He's also got wins over Bobby Green, Jim Miller, Anthony Pettis, the former lightweight champion. Justin Gaethje actually finished Gaethje in that fight. Very impressive. Eddie Alvarez finished him in their rematch. Went the distance with Dan Hooker, defeated him, and then has 2 wins over Conor McGregor, which is interesting because he's also lost to Conor McGregor, and then he get the 2 wins after. I know the third fight was an injury, but Poirier was looking good early on in that fight. Now, some of his notable losses, Korean Zombie, which is crazy that these two are still fighting at this stage in their careers. Well, especially Zombie because he's a lot older. Cub Swanson lost to him at featherweight as well. Lost to Conor McGregor by first round knockout. There was a really interesting build up to that fight. If you remember, McGregor kind of got in his head, and I think Poirier fought a little reckless, and that's what led to McGregor knocking him out. And then, of course, Michael Johnson, I guess we can throw that on there. That was kind of a weird one if you look at Johnson's career after that, but still got knocked out by him. And then he got submitted by Khabib Nurmagomedov, and then most recently he was submitted by Charles Oliveira. But an interesting thing about Poirier here, He's never lost back-to-back fights in his career. So that's what's interesting about this fight. I mean, it is a dangerous opponent here, but we'll see sort of what happens there. Now, Poirier, with a career as long as him, he's going to have some layoffs. It's just, it's going to happen here. So if you look at when he went from fighting Eddie Alvarez the second time, where is it here? Fighting Eddie Alvarez at UFC on Fox 30. That was actually in Calgary. I was at that card. Going from that fight to Max Holloway, there was a 259-day layoff. Going from Khabib Nurmagomedov to Dan Hooker, there was a 294-day layoff. Going from Dan Hooker to Conor McGregor, there was a 210-day layoff. And then going from Oliveira to Chandler, there's going to be a 336-day layoff. So that's the longest of Poirier's career. Just something to make note of. Again, I throw the stats out there just to kind of give you guys a little bit of extra information, and whether you think it plays into the fight or not, I'll leave that up to you guys, but I always like to mention this stuff. One thing about Poirier, aside from being very active throughout his career, he hasn't really had many injuries. If you look at a lot of these canceled fights, they were to his opponents. The only injury that he's had was a fight that unfortunately we never got. That was against Nate Diaz on the Daniel Cormier and Derek Lewis card at UFC 230. Poirier had a hip injury. And of course, there's that famous video of him going under surgery. And I forget what he said to Diaz, but he called him a bitch or something. I can't remember, but it's too bad we'll probably never get to see that fight between him and Diaz, because that would have been very interesting. As far as close fights, I mean, Poirier has gone the distance before, but if you go and look on MMA decisions, I think most people felt he decisively won, except for one fight. And this is one that I kind of forgot that happened, and I should remember it because it happened in Vancouver, where I'm from. UFC 131, Carwin versus Dos Santos, June 2011. 2 media members scored the fight for Poirier. 2 media members scored the fight for Jason Young. So that's interesting. Maybe that fight doesn't go his way. Who knows, how Poirier's career would have gone. But, he still would have been successful. But just interesting that 2 media members felt like Jason Young did enough to win the fight. Young was a very good fighter. Remember, he had that whole issue where he pushed the referee and the UFC cut him. And now I believe he's coaching in Missouri, which is interesting. Okay, so that is Dustin Poirier in a nutshell, the Diamond. One of the most incredible careers in the octagon. And again, I forgot to mention, won the interim title over Max Holloway. So he has been an interim champion before, never an official UFC champion, undisputed champion, I should say. Okay, let's get to Michael Chandler, shall we? Iron Michael Chandler, the former Bellator champion. If you look at it there, Chandler is 23-7. He's got 10 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 5 decision victories. He's 36 years old. He's 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. So it's Poirier who has all the advantages on paper in terms of obviously being a little bit bigger and being younger in this fight. Chandler is 5th in the UFC lightweight rankings. He's the 3-time Bellator lightweight champion. He's the Bellator Season 4 lightweight tournament winner. Remember back when they used to do the tournaments, which, by the way, I know I'm in the minority here. I miss those tournaments, like the ones they used to do every week. That was always really exciting. I really enjoyed those back in the Bjorn Rebney days. And Chandler's a former NCAA Division I wrestler at the University of Missouri. Good accolades to have on the resume. And he trains both at Sanford MMA and Nashville MMA as well, but mainly at actually not Sanford, it's Killcliff, my bad. I forgot they updated that. Chandler, in a short UFC career, already has a couple nice accolades there. Performance of the night 2 times against Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. He's got fight of the night 1 time against Justin Gaethje, and had the 2021 fight of the year by the UFC against Justin Gaethje in his short UFC career. Chandler has fought in a couple different weight classes. Actually fought once at middleweight, and then he fought at a catchweight twice at 165 pounds, which is interesting, but primarily a lightweight throughout his career. Now, Chandler did not have an amateur debut. If you look here, went straight to the pros back in August of 2009. Poirier actually made his professional debut just 3 months earlier, so not far off, even though Chandler's a bit older. Poirier actually made his professional debut a little bit earlier. Now, because he fought in Bellator and was the champion there, Michael Chandler did not make his UFC debut until January of 2021. He's 2-2 in the octagon with 2 stoppage victories. Some notable wins in the octagon are Dan Hooker and some notable wins include Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. I don't usually bring up past wins, but because he fought some good guys in Bellator, I have to bring them up. He had wins over Eddie Alvarez and former lightweight champion Benson Henderson. Now, it should be noted, Benson Henderson on a bit of a decline. Obviously, he's a little bit older here. I know Henderson won a few weeks ago at the time of recording this, but still, I don't think that's as quality of a win, but I had to mention it because Henderson's a former champion. And then some notable losses, obviously Oliveira and Gaethje. I mean, these are 2 top 5, lightweights in the UFC, but I also wanted to bring up some losses that he had in Bellator. Patricio Pitbull, who we saw win last weekend at the time of recording this, losing by first round knockout. I think that's notable just because, again, Pitbull looks pretty dominant in that Bellator weight class. He also lost to Eddie Alvarez in Bellator, and then he lost to Will Brooks twice, which is one of those really weird things. The Will Brooks fight he lost at Bellator 131 is a very weird fight. If you go back and watch it, Chandler almost does like a timeout. Like, it's like his brain was subconsciously telling him, like, I'm taking too much damage. Very odd fight looking at the career that both of us have had since then. Brooks, I know, has been picking up some wins on the regional scene, but it's just weird to see, Chandler fight for a title in the UFC and Will Brooks never achieved that same success in the UFC. So there we go. Chandler's never had any injuries in the UFC. How could he? He's only had, 4 fights in the octagon, but he did have obviously that leg injury at Bellator New York in 2017, where he ended up dropping the title to Brent Primus, if you remember there. As far as close fights, Chandler has not had any close fights in the UFC, but he had a few in Bellator. And again, I'm only bringing this up because he did fight some good opposition in Bellator. When Eddie Alvarez defeated Michael Chandler at Bellator 106, we're going to go all the way back here in 2013. 3 media members scored the fight for Alvarez. 10 media members scored the fight for Chandler. So again, he did lose to Alvarez. That was his first loss, but some people felt like that should have gone the other way. And then the Will Brooks fight he had directly after that, which was in May of 2014, that was also a split decision loss. 1 media member scored the fight for Brooks, 7 scored it a draw, and 5 scored it for Chandler. So either a draw or a Chandler win could have gone there. And I bring that up again because, you look at Chandler, some people say, oh, he's lost 7 times, but again, some of those could have gone the other way there. Okay, let's get to the odds here. As you can see here, most books having Poirier as a slight favorite here at minus 165, around there. Overall, it's about a minus 175. So almost 2-to-1 odds there for Dustin Poirier. The comeback on Chandler is plus 150. Now, I think the fact that this is a 3-round fight is very interesting because I think if it was longer, I actually think that might favor Dustin Poirier a little bit more just because I mentioned it there. We'll go through it. I'll show you here. Dustin Poirier, when he fought Oliveira, 5-round fight. Conor McGregor, 5-round fight. Conor McGregor, 5-round fight. Dan Hooker, 5-round fight. Habib Nurmagomedov, 5-round fight. Max Holloway, 5-round fight. Eddie Alvarez, the second fight, 5 rounds. Justin Gaethje, 5 rounds. Anthony Pettis, 5 rounds. First Eddie Alvarez fight, 3 rounds. So like I mentioned, May 2017 was the last time there. So if it was 5 rounds, I would favor Poirier. With it being 3 rounds, I actually think that does favor Chandler a little bit because we've seen Chandler get a lot of early finishes. And as far as what Michael Chandler brings to the table, we talked about the wrestling accolades. How about his power, man? He knocked out Dan Hooker quite easily when they fought. Now, there could be some school of thought that maybe Hooker wasn't the same Hooker that Poirier fought, but Poirier went to a decision. Now, I didn't mention that as a close fight because all the media members scored the fight for Poirier, but still, Hooker was in that fight. Like, it wasn't a fight that Poirier completely dominated. It was a close fight, even though, again, most media members scoring the fight for Poirier there, which is interesting. So, and the other thing we got to bring up as well is that Poirier's been knocked out a few times, right? He's only been knocked out 1 time at lightweight, and that was against Michael Johnson, which again, weird fight, thinking of where the 2 careers have gone. He's obviously been finished twice by submission in the UFC by Habib Nurmagomedov and Charles Oliveira. But if you look at his losses at featherweight, he was knocked out by McGregor, and he was submitted by the Korean Zombie. So he's been submitted a few times. You see a pattern there. Chandler, not really a submission artist, but Chandler is a knockout artist. So again, Poirier has been knocked out a few times. Could Chandler go in there and knock out Poirier? It's possible. I wouldn't put it past it there. Chandler, if he can come out guns a-blazing, I think there's an opportunity for him to maybe knock out Poirier. But what's likely going to happen? What's likely going to happen is Dustin Poirier is going to probably win a decision here. And the reason I think that is, we've seen him fight a guy like Conor McGregor his last 2 fights. And you can say what you want about Conor, where his career's headed, not being very active. But McGregor does hit very hard. In fact, I would put him maybe even better than Michael Chandler in terms of the power that he possesses, although I think it's very close between the 2. So if he can fight Conor McGregor and not get knocked out in those fights, with McGregor actually hitting Poirier, he hit him, I believe, in that first fight, and then Poirier came back and finished him in the second round. I think Poirier's kind of fixed some of those defensive deficiencies where we saw him get knocked out. I think Poirier's striking has evolved so much since working with Mike Brown at American Top Team over the last couple of years. We've seen him just come out with really good game plans, and I think the coaching is going to be very interesting here. And one thing I didn't even mention, 2 rival gyms, right? Killcliff MMA in Florida against American Top Team. You got to like a lot of that here too. I think this fight's going to play out very similarly to the Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler fight, where same thing, Gaethje's going to get a little bit better shots. He's going to pick his shots a little bit better. I know Gaethje has more power power than Poirier, but I think Poirier is going to be very smart, pick his shots, and not fall prey to the the power of Michael Chandler. I also think Poirier is training with some really good wrestlers. Bo Nickal's an American Top Team. I'm sure they're getting some work together. I don't think Chandler's going to wrestle this fight. I think he's going to try and knock Poirier out, and I just don't see that happening. I think we've had enough evidence at lightweight that Dustin Poirier does not have a bad chin. I think there was a point when some people did say that he had a bad chin, but I don't think that's the case now. To me, it's Chandler. It's knockout or bust. I think otherwise. I think Poirier wins the decision here. So right now, you can get Poirier for, like I said, -165. I think he likely wins. I really do feel that way. He's younger. He's a little bit bigger in this fight. I think Poirier likely takes the decision. But if you want to get even more generous here, maybe look for that decision prop for Dustin Poirier to get it done. I think if Chandler wins, it'll be knockout. I think if Poirier wins, it'll be by decision. I'm going Dustin Poirier by decision as my official pick. Again, I'd love to, make some bold prediction on this preview video, but I really do think Chandler's good. I think he gets a bad rap. A lot of people don't like Chandler for the fact that some people feel like he jumped the line to get his title shot and everything else, but Chandler is very good. Again, finishing Dan Hooker in the first round, knocking out Tony Ferguson. I know some people will mention that Ferguson was having some success early on in that fight, and maybe Chandler isn't as great, but still Chandler finished him. You can't ignore that. So I'm going Dustin Poirier by decision to get it done on UFC 281. So let me know what you think in the comments. Anyone picking Chandler here? Let me know. Curious to hear your thoughts. Let's have a nice debate about this. I always tell you guys are going to throw out insults. If you don't want to debate this and you're going to throw out insults, no point in discussing here. There's a difference between criticism and having a good debate as opposed to people just being ridiculous. So hopefully we can achieve that here in the YouTube comments. I know I'm asking a lot because a lot of people just want to be combative. And also, let me know if there's any other fights you want me to preview. Again, any of the title fights coming up, I'll be previewing. There's some more fights, obviously, that have been announced recently that I will be getting to shortly. But yeah, let me know in the comments if there's any fights you want me to get into. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. I'd really appreciate it. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.